Hey everybody, it's Jake with TrendSpider going into the week of April 29th, excuse me. And we have a guest on this weekend's analysis, Blake, who has been using the platform and messing around with it, really kind of seeing some of the value in TrendSpider. So he's going to do a couple charts for us today after I do the classic SPY, QQQ, and XBI. And he will be doing SQ, TSLA, and XLNX, which is Square, Tesla, and remind me the last one. What company is that, Blake?
Onyx.
Zonix. Okay, beautiful. But awesome. Well, we are happy to have you on here, and I will go ahead and start. And feel free to butt in whenever you have a thought or anything like that.
All right, sounds awesome.
Okay,
Looking forward to
so we're going to start with SPY, the weekly versus the daily, as we typically do. And one thing that's interesting, last week we were looking at divergence on SPY and QQQ, and then XBI was tanking. Did have a nice doji though into Friday, but now that divergence has kind of gone away, and we are just ripped on Friday, closing near the high of the week. And so for me, it's interesting to see, looking back at this longer term chart on the weekly candle, you can see that this previous channel support is now acting as perfect resistance right here. And this has happened a few times as we've moved down since October. So we have that here. We had this big doji, really tried to break through this area and couldn't, broke down. We tried to retest it again, broke down, tried to retest it again, and then further broke down into the end of 2018. And now we have ripped right back up, pretty much straight up to this area. So the question is, will we be able to break this area and then be able to go and test this megaphone resistance above right around 300 on SPY? So not only is that a hard number, a round number people will be watching, it also becomes a psychological barrier because it is a round number, right? People look at round numbers and just, it's an interesting theory there, but it is something to watch. So once we get around 300, if we did get there and continue to break out, I think that's where the really hard resistance would be. And obviously that would be quite a bit higher than what we have had all-time highs back in September before we moved down. So that is the weekly chart. You can see here we still do have room to move down on or move up on the lower indicators. The RSI is starting to break almost above 70. So that doesn't always have to be bearish, right? People think over 70 it's overbought, but then you look here and you've got these moves that have gone to 80, and then you've got this move that went to 95. Now, obviously, the crash after that was pretty spectacular to watch, but that means that there is more room to move up. This doesn't mean that we're going to reverse anytime soon. We can see this on the trend lines, and we can see it on the lower indicators too. Now, if we did start to break down, that's when our multi-factor alerts start to kick in. So for example, I'll go in here, and for me, if we were just really starting to watch the weekly chart, I could go in and create the multi-factor alert for the weekly chart. And let's say we want to watch for a breakdown on the RSI below, I don't know, if we started breaking below 60, that'd be something for me to watch. So we just do potential breakdown, expires in 14 days and triggered one time. So we would do the condition is the weekly indicator, and that is the relative strength is less than the constant value of 60. So whenever if the RSI did start to break down and it did price action did start to reverse, we would then be alerted when that happens. Now, if we also wanted to be alerted when the blue crosses the red on the vortex indicator, because as we've seen, when this convergence does occur, that has been an area in the past where there's been a bigger breakdown. So we can also just put that in. And keep in mind, these are just the indicators and the signals that I'm using for this particular chart. There's all different types of signals you can use. Everyone really has their own technical signal. Blake, I'm sure you have your own certain criteria that you use as well. But these are just kind of the ones that I use. So we'll go in, do the same thing here. We'll do, that's the vortex 10. So the vortex positive has crossed. Actually, let's not do cross. Let's just do the vortex positive. We'll do the weekly vortex positive So 10, and we'll just say is less than, and let's say if this starts to converge below 125, that will be our area to watch. So if we have the constant value of 1.25, we'll see this start to break down as well. So now that this alert is created, we just go and create the alert here. And then if we did start to break down, I don't need to be staring at the weekly chart to see this possible breakdown. It will alert me when it occurs. And so that's the beauty of one of the core features of TrendSpider, is this ability to really just create alerts and then have the system watch them for you. Now on the weekly chart, I kept it pretty simple, because at the end of the day, a lot of the indicators are starting to get a little funky here as we are really getting, I don't want to say overbought, but definitely the indicators work a lot better on really strong reversal areas such as this area down here. And now we're really just starting to get overbought, but that doesn't mean anything technically. Let me just pull this up. We'll do the percent range, relative strength, and the vortex. So you can see here, I mean, we technically are in really kind of overbought territory on the daily. So it is something to consider. The ascending wedge is something to consider as well. This is not the most traditional trend line here, but that is something to watch this area, because really at the end of the day, this is really just a line of best fit across these few candles, because at the end of the day, it really didn't do anything here. So that's why we're able to capture this and really not have to worry about it being perfect. But yeah, we'll just have to see here. We do have the alert breakdown on the weekly, so if things did start to reverse hard after we tested this area above, we'll be alerted. Now, what I can also do real quick is I'll just put an alert on this upper indicator, upper trend line, and I'll do it pretty not sensitive, just because I want to get a perfect touch. What I'm going to do is put the alert sensitivity zone right where this candle was, so we'll capture that kind of zone. We'll have it trigger on the 5-minute, so that means anytime the 5-minute candle closes in this purple area, we will be alerted. And we're not going to call it the condescending Colden. We're going to call it ascending wedge resistance. And sorry guys, the alert names can get a little crazy. They are randomly generated, so just a heads up there. And we'll do this for 7 days have passed or triggered one time, and now we're set up. We have the system watching some of the core levels and price areas that we want to watch, and we can move on to the next chart. So that is SPY. We are near a pretty hard level of resistance here, which was support. We'll just have to see what happens next week on the weekly. On QQQ, it looks a little different here. We do have this massive breakout through all-time highs here, and I mean, this just shows buyers are really in control. And it still blows my mind that we have only had technically one red week in 2019. Obviously, we had a hollow candle somewhere in there, right here, the hollow red candle. But when you have a hollow candle, it still prints as green volume. So technically, we have only had one red volume bar, which is just crazy to me. This can't go straight up forever, but there is room above to move up based on this megaphone resistance above. And same thing, you can see the Qs are moving up a little harder here than SPY. SPY was right around 70. On the Qs, we're at around 75. The lower indicator vortex looks very similar too. So if this started to break down, that would be something I'd be watching for. Now on the daily candle, we kind of see the same exact thing as we did on SPY, where we've got this ascending wedge going on. It's a little more defined here. We don't have some of these outliers just kind of outside of the trend line. It's more of a precise trend line here. So we are trading right in the middle of it, and it's kind of interesting to see how price action has literally just gone right through the middle of this wedge. It hasn't tested either one of these zones to the upside or the downside really since, early March. It's been trading, or I guess no, it touched here, so that's March 21st. But since then, it has not touched either one of these trend lines. So it will be interesting to see which one finally gives and which way the price action does go. Same thing, ascending wedges are kind of interesting to watch. They are technically, I think, from kind of what I've learned, technically you would look at that as a possible bearish setup, but I've seen plenty of these break to the upside. Especially I think back in 2016 or 17, there was a ascending wedge that just absolutely ripped to the upside, and there was really no looking back until early 2018. So for that reason, don't really know where this is going yet. But the beauty of these alerts, and I'll do it again, is you can really just create an alert on both sides of the wedge, and then you'll just see which way the price action goes, and you'll be alerted right when the price breaks through one of those two areas. So we'll do the same thing, 5-minute, wedge resistance, 14 days or triggered once. And so now if this does break to the upside, we'll be alerted. And then same thing, if it breaks to the downside, we'll be alerted as well. And so then we don't really have to look at this chart until we get that alert for the breakdown or the break to the upside. Wedge support, 14 days, triggered once. All right, so now we're set up here. All in all, you can really see it on the weekly how this wedge is just so tight here, and it will really be interesting to see which way we decide to go. Last one, but not least, we have XBI, which really had a nice move this week after a huge plunge last week, or excuse me, the week before. But on the weekly side of things, it does look pretty nice here. We've got this bounce off the symmetrical wedge here. You technically still do have the inverse head and shoulders action going on, but we do have the vortex blue starting to converge towards the red here, which I had mentioned previously in the chart that this is what we're looking for a potential breakdown, especially when there's a big divergence here between the blue and the red. You can see when it hits this threshold right around 1.3, regardless if it's the blue or the red, that's generally an area you can watch for a potential reversal. So we topped out here on the blue back in July of 2018, and then that was really the topping area. And then once we converged here, that's when it was kind of the confirmation of the downtrend. And then the textbook cross on the red through the blue here was confirmation of the uptrend. And now we are back here. So we'll have to see if we start to break down or we just continue to rip through this ascending wedge and try to retest new all-time highs. Notice how we're very far away from all-time highs here, and we weren't really that far away, obviously on SPY, and we've already hit it on the Qs. So that is something to watch. Same thing here on the daily. We do not have an ascending wedge here, but we do have a breakdown of this wedge, and then we could possibly be testing this area above. So if you wanted to, you could put an alert here to watch for a potential touch of that area before possibly reversing. We'll just have to see. One thing that really kind of is interesting to me is this big uptick in volume. Notice the last couple months, all of the big selling or all of the big volume has been to the sell side with these big upticks in the red volume candles, so or the volume bars. So that's something to watch. And I think it's going to be an interesting May, and you do have the classic sell in May, go away, but we'll just have to see if that holds true or it's a fluke and we just continue to move up higher. That is all I have. I'm going to hand it over to Blake, and Blake, let's hear about Square, Tesla, and I forgot the last one again, but XLNX.
Yeah, sure. One thing I just wanted to mention while you had that chart up of XBI is that massive red candle, that massive sell-off day was mainly driven by a lot of these biotech companies reporting earnings, being in the middle of the earnings season. And what's interesting is how big of a candle that was and how big the volume was. It still somehow seems to kind of bounce off that lower neutral or symmetrical wedge you were talking about. And I'm thinking now that, like you said, going into May historically isn't always the greatest month. Considering some of these have been trading at a discount the last week or so, I'm interested to see, are these things going to continue to slowly climb higher, or can we, will we see another breakdown? I don't know, but I think definitely that's an area to watch, and I know a lot of people have had their eyes on that sector for a while now.
Yeah,
and,
it's a weird sector, man. It's obviously it's more speculative and all that, so you do get the more bigger gyrations. And it's funny, sometimes I've seen XBI kind of foretell what the price action is going to do in the broad markets, just because you sometimes get that you can feel the sentiment changing because XBI, if people are selling XBI, that could mean that risk off is kind of there. So I love the feedback. We kind of are in that status quo change area, kind of area of the year, if you will, where earnings can definitely change the tone of the market and really kind of set the stage for the rest of the summer.
Right. Okay. Can you see my screen on Tesla now?
Yes, I can.
All right. Perfect. So we wrote this one right away too, because it kind of relates to the whole earnings thing. Any of you that follow Tesla closely know that they just reported a huge earnings miss on the 24th of April, causing this massive red candle here. But fundamentals aside, what I find interesting about this is kind of where we are in relation to Tesla's historical price action. So the first thing I want to notice is that we have this nice kind of falling wedge happening here. It looks like it might have kind of failed with that large red candle, but in my opinion, I don't think that it's completely over, because if you kind of expand this chart out a bit and you see historically, Tesla has not really gone down past this $240 range. Obviously, this is looking at the weekly candles here. If I throw a trend line on to see just kind of make a horizontal trend line, we're pretty much at that retracement point where we hit back in March of last year. So it's been over a year that Tesla's not gone down below this, and it'd be interesting to see, does this open up higher on Monday? Do we have some sort of doji day, or does it continue to fall further? If you look, volume obviously extremely high, being around earnings season, that's no surprise there. MACDs, RSI definitely trending downwards. RSI hitting the oversold level here. So if I put my cursor here, you can see looking back at all these dips here, that the only time RSI went lower than the point we are now was right here, and look what happened immediately after. We had a massive bull run in price after that. So just looking at this alone, saying going off an oversold play, this might be something to watch. Obviously some of the institutional investors are going to be looking and more heavily focused on the earnings component of this. But fundamentals aside, I think this would be a great technical play to watch. If you one that likes to play kind of oversold stocks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I mean, it's an interesting one, man. Tesla is, I mean, a great product. Everyone who has one that I know, and that's not too many people, loves it. I mean, they freaking love it. But if you look at kind of how the company and the fundamentals are, it just, some of it doesn't make sense. I heard a really interesting presentation a couple weeks ago about essentially how Tesla's about to go bankrupt.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see what happens. I didn't act on it. I didn't buy any puts or anything, but I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't, because it was at like 274 during that presentation. But yeah, man, great points there. It is starting to break down through that 240 area, and the RSI is starting to creep down a little bit. Do you, just a quick question, so RSI and MACD are the two indicators you mostly are looking at on the lower side of things?
Yep, that's generally what I follow. Sometimes I like to look at the stochastic. I didn't even pull it up for this one because I just saw that these look relevant here.
Yep.
If you can get the 14 RSI to be oversold, just generally, historically speaking, it just price does not stay down that far.
Yep.
So kind of playing on a historic statistical play there. It is a bit risky, like I said, if the company may not be the most financially sound. I know that they're one of the only large cap companies to have their most recent bond issue rated at a junk rating. So that's something to consider. Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to something a little bit more interesting.
Prosperous.
I think is Square. A lot of people have been watching. Oh, sorry. Let me get my junk off of here. A lot of people have been watching Square. I've had a lot of comments or a lot of chart requests to go through this, actually. And let me just kind of throw some lines in here that I saw initially, and we'll talk about kind of where I can see this thing going in the future. So this is actually one that I used the trend feature for. I found interesting. Is this picked up this perfect descending trend line here, and then I would add a few manually I would add, looks like back here, in the past we had a nice falling wedge that actually played out very nicely when it finally broke out. And it might be a coincidence because it seems like it broke out around the January bull run. But nonetheless, it was a nice falling wedge play. And it looks like at the same time, we sort of have a nice coiling pattern here in price. And if you look, it kind of looks like it's sort of breached the support line here. But what I find interesting is look at where it stopped. It seems that it bounced off of the 100-day moving average. That's what I have plotted on here. So in my opinion, I don't think that the support is actually breached. I think it was just a sell-off day. It retraced to the 100-day moving average and then had a nice, looks like it might be a bullish engulfing candle, besides a small wick there, the next follow-through day. One thing to note on this that I've been watching it is look at volume. If I draw a trend line on volume, pretty much all the way back from the start of the year, there's been a few times that we've had larger than expected volume, but volume has been really on a huge decrease. Like volume is so flat; it hasn't been this flat since almost a year ago, which is quite interesting. And that kind of goes along with where we are on the MACD. Like, look how coiled this MACD is, almost flat, and furthermore, it's flat at the 0 line. So generally, when you see a coiling pattern in the MACD and a dry up of volume while price is consolidating, it generally speaking, and it means that there might be a large breakout coming. Now, that could obviously be a break down or a break upward, but price does not like to stay flat for too long.
It's very similar to the Bollinger Bands, right? And it's really interesting.
Yes, exactly.
The math behind that is kind of fascinating, and I never really understood, like, oh, why in this case the fast is almost the same as the slow, and that's because the price action has pretty much stayed in a very stagnant range, and so the fast almost starts to become the slow because of that. And so you can see that sometimes on the Bollinger Bands too, when there's really flat action for a while. The Bollinger Bands are going to converge because the variation between the price action is very small. So the standard deviation between kind of the mean of that price action becomes very tight as well. And that's how you get that really kind of tight area. And that's why breakouts sometimes occur, because something's got to go, whether that's to the upside or the downside. So it's cool that you mentioned the coiling action on the MACD. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, generally that's one of the things I look for. Obviously volume is huge too. I like to see, everybody always says, like, or they always ask me, like, why do you want to see volume drying up? Don't you want to see stocks that have, a lot of volume? And that's absolutely true on a breakout. But something that will cause something like this to break out is an inflow of volume. And because the volume is so low right now, it doesn't need that much of an increase to actually get this thing going. One thing that Trader Stewie mentioned, I don't know if so a lot of people, I know a lot of people follow him.
Oh, yeah.
He mentioned that specifically on this stock that when big names like this start to coil and kind of don't go anywhere, a lot of people start watching these things and they don't trade. You don't see a lot of buyers, you don't see a lot of sellers, and that almost prolongs the period of this coiling. So I wouldn't be surprised if this coils for another week or two before we see a large move, but it's definitely something that I'd keep your eye on.
Yeah, that 100-day SMA is, I think, going to be it's kind of interesting how that 100-day SMA kind of creates a wedge too. It's kind of, that's your support, and then you've got
it might even be a better indication than the line that I quickly drew here.
Because you could still go if the SMA 100 continued to go, you could still go into the apex of that wedge until late May. So that could
absolutely
still consolidate, like you said, for a couple more weeks. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, so on this one, because the price has touched the descending trend line so many times, if I was going to set an alert on this line, which I did have, I took it off for this video so I could go through making one, I would obviously do a break. They wouldn't want to touch for a bounce because it seems like we've done that so many times you could easily get faked out.
Yep.
But I would leave the sensitivity here, because that way when you see it touch this area, you at least can start looking at it.
Yep.
This is one of those charts that I think that you don't need to be having your eyes constantly glued to yet. But if you can have something like this where you can just put it to the side. I'll set this alert. So I would even set this for 5 minutes. So when it touches or when it gets around this area for 5 minutes, if it's over that line for 5 minutes, I'm interested in it. I want to know.
Yep.
But I don't think you need to be fully watching it until that happens. So that's one of these things where I would do descending trend line break. And then I would 14 days. I think is actually this one's pretty full. I go a month out on this one, and you have a nice alert for when this thing actually happens. You can quick go over and see. Okay, does this look like it's a powerful move? You can kind of reassess that. And, is the volume higher? Is it where I want it to be? Is the MACD now sloping upward, and etc.
Yep, 100%.
So, all right, so that's what I have in that one. And the last one is XLNX. Xilex. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right or not. But this is one that I actually played yesterday. This might be more of a how I traded it style video. It is definitely analysis, but maybe more how I traded it. I know some of you, but I posted this on Stock Twits before, and people like this style. So I thought it was interesting and definitely something to share. If you want to watch this, they reported earnings on Thursday. I think that was the 25th. 25th. I looked at the earnings numbers and they looked fine to me. They missed, they beat on revenue, but they missed on revenue per share, whether that's due to dilution or whatnot. I'm not exactly sure, but they did beat the top line revenue numbers. They did increase guidance, so it wasn't like Tesla earnings where they missed hugely, but still, if you look, price totally dropped off a cliff. Hey, let me move those for a second. Totally dropped off a cliff. To the point where they were testing back when they had their prior power earnings gap back at the beginning of the year. So what I found interesting about this was I saw the numbers, they looked fine. Price just totally I thought was a major overreaction. And then it opened up the next day, started trending downward, got really ugly, and I'm like, oh man, this could be a multi-day drop. And then the first thing I did was like, okay, well, I plotted some moving averages on here, and I noticed that it gapped right underneath the 50-day moving average.
Wow.
And I didn't think that was a coincidence. I thought, okay, what happened is everybody that had their stop loss at the 50-day got stopped out, and it triggered all of those, and it literally gapped down the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally thinking, I'm like, okay, where would our next support be? So I just started plotting some moving averages on, and it turns out that the 100-day is also another great example for this chart. As you see, the wick of this candle that we had yesterday barely broke through it, just touched it and retraced immediately. This happened within like 10 minutes, I believe, on Friday. So I saw this Thursday night, and I noticed that the 100-day was the next moving average day. And at the time, I'm like, okay, I don't even know if it's going to go near that. It could totally V bottom upwards, and it might never touch that. But I said, all right, well, I might as well set an alert at this line to know if it touches, bounces, breaks through, whatever. I want to know within as low as 5 minutes nearing this moving average. So I set an alert, and then the next day, the very next morning, I think it was like within 30 minutes of the market opening, I got an alert saying it was at the line, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is breaking down. And all of a sudden I looked, and it just started moving up and up and up and up. So I think I hopped in around 113. I didn't have the best buy point because I wasn't sure if it was going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just absolutely tore, and it closed with so much power, closing at 120. So this, I think, is a really great example of how you can sort of implement some of these alerts into some of this large price action history, strong reversals and stuff like this. I'm not sharing this to say I made a great trade and this was something that you should follow. I'm sharing this because I think it's something that can easily be replicated. I've traded these kind of setups multiple times. It's called the Holy Grail setup. Essentially, when price retraces to a key moving average and then bounces off of that. So I think that if you can set alerts near these kind of moving averages, key moving averages that people watch, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy
Yep.
that it bounces off that because everyone's watching it at that point, you know?
Yep. Well, and it's interesting too, right? Every stock has its own personality because let's say a majority of the participants trading Apple are looking at the SMA 20 rather than the EMA 50, then it's based on what the overall the participants are doing in the market. So, like you said, things become so self fulfilling, and it's cool to see. What may be self fulfilling on one chart, like the 100-day SMA on XLNX, may not work at all on another stock, and so a lot of people get stuck saying, "Oh, well, this worked so perfectly on this stock and then didn't work that great on another stock." It's like, well, yeah, you have to kind of optimize sometimes your indicators per chart because stocks bounce off different levels. But for the most part, there are specific moving averages that do become self fulfilling a lot of the time.
Right, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I know there's a lot of stocks that I trade that tend to find support around the 20-day,
Mm-hmm.
and like this one, 50, 100-day. So it really depends. And it's really easy to switch, just put a different number, try the 100-day, try the 50-day. The best way I can kind of put it is you want to look for a moving average that helps explain the price action. You don't want the form that just waits for the chart, but one that explains it. Why is price finding support here? Well, in this chart, it's clear that it's finding support at the 100-day.
Yep. No, I love it. No, that's great. And I haven't really used the SMA 100. I may have to give that a shot.
Yeah, it's I don't use it too frequently, but I found that for some reason, like I said, this name just for some reason found support here. Another reason might be if you look at what price is, it basically hit 110, and that is kind of a more round number that people are probably like, okay, I don't think it's going to fall below 110,
Yep.
and that probably helped fuel the upside there.
Yeah, everyone likes their round numbers. It's a
Yeah,
lot
well,
easier to
if
do
this thing
math
hit
on.
100, I'm sure it would have. If it fell through here, I'm sure it would have bounced at $100.
Yeah, most of the time I make decisions at least, or I don't want to say that always, but a lot of the time it's just easier to do math with an even or round number or a quarter, like 250 or 500. So I usually do lots of that just because it's easier to track. So
Oh no, absolutely,
it's
yeah.
like just so much easier to track. I can do it in my head. I start doing like random numbers, or not round numbers, and my brain just doesn't work that way. So um, I think overall, just people love those round numbers, and it's cool to see here that right off 110, that was just a hard psychological support area, and it's cool to see the confluence of support there, where it's not only just the psychological round number support area, but it's also right on the SMA 100 too.
Right, yeah.
And it seems like every time it's bounced off that, there's been a pretty good rip back to at least the SMA 50.
Right, and that's kind of a good way to see how these things fit is, if it finds support at this line, odds are if you look back, you can historically see, like you pointed out, that it will test that line. Obviously here, huge reversal here. It'll test that line multiple times, and if it ends up holding it each time, you can generally assume that's a huge word, obviously, that it's going to find support there, or you can at least watch it to see if it does. It's definitely something that should give you an idea. Hey, maybe it might hold this price here. I should be watching this, or better yet, I should set an alert so when it does watch it, I can quick hop on and see. Okay, is this a smart trade or not?
Yep. No, it's beautiful. I love it. Well, I think we are about out of time, but what a weekend analysis this was. I'm gonna have to have you on more often. This was perfect, man. I really enjoyed hearing your side of how you're looking at the charts, and that's the beautiful thing about trading is everyone has their own style. Nobody's style is perfect. There's thousands of different ways to look at the market, and it's always cool to hear a different perspective. And really appreciate you jumping on and giving us your perspective and how you've used the platform a little bit in your everyday trading.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I had a good time. It was fun. I'd definitely like to come out another time. Really
Oh,
enjoyed it.
oh, absolutely. We'll get it planned out. And thanks again. And if anyone has any questions at all on the platform or the pricing or anything about the features, you can check out. And let me go ahead and share my screen again real quick. well, I guess it doesn't really matter, but I'll just present now real quick. You can check out the trendspider.com-pricing page, and that's going to give you all the information about the different pricing plans we have. And if you want to go to product, you can see all the different features we have. If you want to see videos on any of these features, you can also go to blog and go to categories. TrendSpider User Guide is going to have all these different videos and explanations of how to use specific core features in the platform. So that wraps up the video today. Everyone, thank you so much for listening in, and we will have another video for you next week. And happy trading to everyone. Thanks so much.